As everyone in this conference knows, COVID-19 has challenged Canada in many ways on both the human and economic level. And compared perhaps to some other countries, we've been very, very fortunate to have outstanding collaboration within civil society and with government in developing our response. Perrin Beatty is CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I'll give a little bit of an intro to him in a minute. Hassan Yussuff, President of the Canadian Labour Congress. So two very major leaders of civil society, and they've modeled this collaboration right from the beginning of the pandemic. As many of you know, their joint approach to Prime Minister Trudeau opened the door to many conversations at the sectoral, provincial, and local levels. I'm familiar with just some of the sectoral collaboration, and it's been very impressive and has involved our major unions, major employers, and has moved some really big issues very effectively. We're fortunate to have Perrin and Hassan presenting. We initially called it a joint keynote, but we're now calling it a fireside chat. And it's meant to show how we can take that kind of collaboration and focus it on a new issue: how to ensure that persons with disabilities are fully included in the recovery in our economy and labor market. So I'll briefly introduce our speakers, and then they'll take it away. And I think they've done sessions like this before. I think you're in for a very special conversation. And we have a hard stop at 2:45 due to schedules and technology, but we're going to have a good stretch of time together. So first, Hassan Yussuff. Hassan, as I mentioned, is president of the Canadian Labour Congress. He's the first person of color to lead Canada's union movement. He's served 2 terms starting in 2014. He's led a number of major campaigns around workplace rights, Canada Pension Plan, pharmacare, leave of absence for survivors of domestic violence that's paid, harassment and violence in the workplace, and dear to my heart, a national ban on asbestos, where I've worked closely with Hassan in the past. Hassan's also working internationally as president of the Trade Union Federation of the Americas. And he's got a really interesting history that will really inform our approach to the conversation, because he came from Guyana. He became a union member, and in fact, became an executive officer of a local, I think at age 19. He worked his way up through the Canadian Auto Workers Union and became the organization's first human rights director before moving on to the CLC. So Hassan has lived a lot of the issues that may pose barriers for some persons with disabilities as they encounter the labor market again. Perrin Beatty has had an incredible career in public service in Canada. He's currently president and CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. He's served a similar role at the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. So just imagine the range of business interests that he's learned about. He himself is a descendant of a prominent manufacturing family in Canada. He had over 20 years in Parliament, serving our country, served as minister in 7 different portfolios. He's been an honorary visiting professor at Western University. He's been president and CEO of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, chancellor of the University of Ontario Institute of Technology, and received recognition both from Canada with the Order of Canada, being made an officer in 2018, and in 2020, the Order of the Rising Sun Gold and Silver Star from the government of Japan for advancements in Canada-Japan business relations. So we have 2 very, very broadly experienced folks who have a lot to say about collaboration, and we're looking forward to how they apply their thinking and their approach to the issue of disability and employment. So take it away. I don't even know which of you is going first.
Alec, thank you. Why don't I start? And Hassan, great to see you again. Alec, you set the bar very high for us, so it's going to be a real challenge, Hassan, for us to keep up to this. I'd be really interested, Hassan, in your impressions. We haven't had a chance to chat for the last while. And I'd be very interested in getting your sense as to what are the specific impacts of the second wave of COVID? How's this affecting your members, and particularly persons with disability? Have you found that there are problems that are unique to the second wave that you didn't see in the first, or is it a continuation of where we were before?
Well, thank you, Perrin. Good to see you. And of course, thanks, Alec, and all the organizers, and of course, all those who are joining the conference. I know how important this conference is, of course, in the context of the UN, acknowledging, of course, the important work we have to do on disability. And of course, this conference allows us to focus a bit on the area that we can talk about more specifically at the federal level. How do we use um, the Accessibility Canada Act as to how we can further make inroads to allow more people in terms of employment, but also how we retain in that employment. I think your point, Perrin, I think very close to my heart is that since the second wave have begun, what we're seeing, of course, a continuing lockdown of workers in many sectors are not able to get back to work, or the sector, of course, are contracting. But equally, before we got to the second wave, there were workers who never got back to employment as a result of the first wave. We know that from hospitality sector, the hotel sector, the airline sector. We've got still lots of members in those sectors that are still out of work. And of course, among them, of course, there are workers with disability, who, of course, who've been marginalized in that process. So in the context of the second wave, this just add, of course, to the stress that people are already dealing with and wondering, when we're going to get back to normal. We're all wondering that, but I guess it's even more so if you are been unemployed now for quite some time and wondering as to, okay, when does we return to work? So that challenges still remain, and I think many employers who are also struggling as how they're going to get their businesses back to work are wondering the same thing as we're trying to figure out when we can get back to that normal, as we would call it. Go back to when we started in March. People were actually functioning in the railway and the economy.
Certainly, one of the things that is apparent to us in the work that we've been doing and talking to businesses is that businesses, the impact of COVID has been very uneven across businesses. Some hit much harder than others. You mentioned, for example, the airline sector is an example of one which has been particularly hard hit. Restaurants, tourism, hospitality, all of those. But we're also seeing it among demographic groups. Women have been hard hit. New Canadians have been hard hit. Younger people, persons with disabilities have been as well. And we've been collaborating with Statistics Canada and doing surveying of businesses to look at business condition. And one of the things that our survey data is showing is that there are particular challenges for companies that are owned by persons with disabilities, and it has hit them harder than it's hit other sectors. But it's also shown that they've demonstrated a degree of ingenuity and innovativeness that is, in many instances, ahead of what you've seen in the rest of the business as well. How have you found among your members? Has it been very uneven in that sense, or have you found that persons with disabilities have been affected in virtually the same way?
Pretty well, as you described. It's been very uneven. We know from a lot of our women members, they've been far more impacted with this pandemic. The challenge, of course, with taking care of children because of course, kids going back to school on many occasions, starting with the sniffles and everybody saying, hang on a minute, you can't come to school. They got to stay home. Their parents are not there to look after them. So the burden has been tremendous. But in addition to that, of course, there's the reality, of course, caring for loved ones, which most of that is fall to women. And we're seeing, of course, and hearing those stories and continuing to document. I think what the stats are starting to show to a large extent that women have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic and not able to return to the work at the same level that men has been able to go back to work in that regard. I also believe that what we're also seeing, despite the fact that people are able to work from home, this also presents an added challenge and burden for people with disability, because in many occasions, as we were going through this reality in our own home, how do we get the office equipped to deal with working from home? My partner is working from home, and I can tell you the stores have seen a lot of purchase, the things that we didn't have that we felt we had to get because otherwise we couldn't function in a way that would consider normal. As a matter of fact, we just went out and bought a new chair because the one we had wasn't ergonomically properly designed. And I think for people with disability, if you don't have access to technology or you don't have access to the internet, this presents a tremendous value. But equally, we're hearing, despite that some may say, this may be one way kind of made a little bit more equal for those who are working from home. But I don't think it's the same in the context of people, because the accessibility part of having an office and making it conducive to work and safe for work, it's not the same. But I do believe that these are things that we're going to have to figure out. Some businesses may decide that they may not want the office space in the future. And I think that will certainly lead to some conversation about how do we deal with some of the challenges that people who are now forced to work at home, how do we assist them and support them to make sure they can do that, but at the same time recognizing the interaction and the camaraderie that people normally like to have to, again, when you're working with somebody in a typical environment, is going to be missing. So we know there's going to be huge demographic and statistical data that's going to show us that it's an uneven recovery and is going to continue. And the stat scans, I think, are showing us on a monthly basis. I think what we need to really much pay attention to as the recovery will get to, certainly when the vaccine is starting to happen, are we seeing some leveling off of the unequalness? And is it getting back to what we would consider normal, where people are able to get back to work, but equally, are they able to participate in the paid workforce again in the same way they were doing prior to the pandemic?
Our folk Canadian Chamber has been, first of all, workplace accessibility. What can we do to ensure that workplaces are made friendly and accessible for persons with disabilities? And we've worked closely with the Rick Hansen Foundation in terms of trying to encourage that. But the other area that we've been focused on is the issue of mental health in the workplace. That's an issue which often is invisible in many ways to employers across the country. The loss to our economy and the social costs of mental health issues in the workplace are considerable. It strikes me that COVID has exacerbated this, particularly if you take people with disabilities who may have difficulty getting into work at the best of times, and being able to get out as a result of social isolation. They may be feeling a sense of stress and social isolation that is even worse than it is for the rest of us who are able-bodied. And that is a major concern. What I'm seeing at this point when I talk to people is that people were hoping, as we got into the summer, things started to warm up, restrictions were being lifted, people were able to go out again. There was the feeling that we were emerging from the tunnel and that things were going to get better. As we got into fall and started to see infection rates rising, more lockdowns taking place, more businesses closing, people's mood was significantly affected by that, because they have the sense that they're on something that may be long lasting and that there's little they can do about it. I am worried about the impacts in terms of mental health. Is this something that you folks have been grappling with as well? And are there things we might do together to try to deal with that?
Well, I think this has been an issue, and it certainly is getting lots of attention. The media is focusing more on it, which is a good thing, because it means that it's not stigmatized the way it used to be. Secondly, of course, there've been consistent investment being made as to how we can better provide services that's going to support those who need those kinds of support. One of the things we are seeing constantly now in the context of our collective bargaining is that more and more of our affiliates are bargaining with their employer mental health coverage to get them access to mental health support, and make sure that's there in the collective agreement as a way to say that we're acknowledging that this is an issue. It needs to be recognized as one of the workplace issue, and more importantly, how do we provide support for people that are going to need that. I think also too, the more broader conversation we have about this, the more I think we're able to give people a sense that whatever their challenges might be, that this is not something that they should be afraid to bring both to their employer or their union, or to that matter, it's not something we should be shy from raising publicly, because we're all going through that. I think what this pandemic has done is test the best of us in terms of how we're coping. I think it was just last week I was saying to somebody, I said, I don't know how long this is going to go on, but I'm not sure what my sanity level is going to be before we get to the end of this. Because it's testing some of your best skills. I've said to people, I've never worked harder than any time in my job than I've been doing during this pandemic, because there's always something coming at you that my affiliates are asking me to address or to engage with in a way to help drive some direction that could assist them in some way. And I think that this is going to continue to be a challenge for us going forward. I think the work that's been done around mental health, and there'll be some good collaboration by governments and employers and unions and a lot of other organizations. I think we need to accelerate that work to show we've got a common approach to how we're going to treat this, because it is part and parcel of the challenges that not only workers with disability face, but other workers that are struggling with other issues that is related to disability that's equally important. One of the other areas I think that that's also been important, I think, in this pandemic, Perrin, that the government have also addressed a couple of areas that I thought was in the throne speech, which was I thought was timely, but equally recognizing that, acknowledging that COVID-19 has disproportionately affected people with disabilities, and this is a long-standing challenge, not only at the federal level, but it's also at the provincial and territorial level. And more importantly, we need to figure out how we can focus on this going forward. The Act also, I think the Accessibility Act provide a necessary tool now for some engagement at the federal level, showing some leadership. And I think this is going to be, it's historic in the context of the work that's been done by disability rights activists, unions, employers, and others, of course, to try to get this to pass. And it's now the law of the land federally. But equally, now, how do we take it as a tool to figure out how we can improve the employment of people with disability? We have always prided ourselves that, when people get injured, we try to get them back to work, get them rehabilitation, get them accommodation. But we also know we have to go farther than that, because far too many people with disability are also unemployed, I think, in general. And I'm hoping that this act will lead us to sit down at the national level with the federal government and says, okay, how can we work with you? Because this is not going to happen magically in the private sector. The federal government have control over the public sector, but in the private sector, meaning employer and unions have to come together to figure out how we can work together to try and improve representation. But equally, how do we deal with bringing more people into the workforce, recognizing, of course, the extreme challenges that still too many face within this country, but also an opportunity for us to consider how this might be a way for us to collaborate.
If there's some good news here over the course of the last few months, one element would perhaps be that I'm certainly seeing, when I talk to members of the business community, greater sensitivity on the issue of diversity and on the issue of inclusion and inclusiveness, the importance of ensuring that our workplace and that our management structure as well is representative of the population at large. And that will give us an opportunity, I think, to sensitize people to the need to look at recruitment of bringing in persons with disabilities and ensuring that we accommodate what their needs are. If there's one thing that we've learned about during COVID, it's the need to be flexible and to look at new ways of working and of providing work. And it may be that one of the lessons we can take out of this is the need to be more flexible, more accommodating, and to design the organization in a way that accommodates the needs of our staff much more. So both in terms of recruitment and in terms of the provision of facilities and the nature of the organization itself, I think there's scope for us to make some really considerable progress here. And when you consider that the studies show that over 20% of the population is listed as being among persons with disabilities, we're a country that's rich, but we can't afford to waste the skills of anybody who wants to contribute. And what you have there is a pool of people capable of contributing and helping us to grow our economy. And too often we're simply setting them aside and not using those skills. I see a very real opportunity for us here to move forward in a positive way.
I couldn't agree more. I think the point you made about wasted talent and skills that's out there, recognizing again as we're trying to compete with the world as to how we attract people here, there's also people that we have that are quite willing to participate in the paid workforce if given an opportunity. And too often, I think the word as it has connotation disability, it means different thing for different people. But I think employers are fully aware that there's lots of people who could, be productive in their workplace. And more importantly, we need to figure out how we could start doing some mapping, looking at the legislation, how we could assist us, but also, coming to that collective table to talk how we can all contribute in this way. I think you're absolutely right. As you know, as we were just about to start in this pandemic, we saw Black Lives Matters manifest itself across North America and other places throughout the world and highlight the issue of course, folks that are Black and talking about racism. And now we all recognize we can't ignore that reality. We cannot allow this to simply pass by. There's a calling and a need for recognition, but also the need for change and acknowledgement. I think the same can't be said about employment around people with disability. We need to do better. I think we can do better. And more importantly, the legislation, I think, can help us in that regard. The other point I would make is also there are some things that the government did identify in the throne speech that I think would be interesting as it manifests is, when you're not employed and you don't have a regular income, the challenges of how you deal with life's necessities are not easy. I think the government's identified they want to bring in some kind of a comparable benefit to the guaranteed income that can help people with disability at least have a floor as to how they can support themselves. I think this is a necessary development because it will ensure that people are not living in abject poverty, and how do we help them in that way. At the same time, recognizing what they would really like is to have a regular full-time job like the rest of us who are fortunate they can contribute into the economy and, of course, help build their neighborhoods, patronize the businesses and other services that all of us take for granted at the end of the day. And I think also, too, I saw recently in the fiscal update, the government said they're going to look at reviewing the Employment Equity Act, which is also another tool for us to say, well, how does it work? Is there things that we can actually take from that act in regard to the review to complement the Accessibility Act at the same time? And if the two can work in tandem, it will give them the tools. As always, I think it's important for us to recognize this. There's good work we can do together. And more importantly, of course, collaboration is far better than when we're opposing each other, because what it does lead to is a whole different set of synergies that can help make a difference to move this agenda much quickly. And I think that we're certainly committed in the history to recognize that this is a reality of the world we live in today, and this is a reality of Canada. We got to do better, and more importantly, we can show extremely good leadership by collaborating with government in a way as to how we can further make sure the act actually have some meaningful, tangible change on behalf of these people that are crying out for support to improve their representation in the workforce.
Going back to the issue of income supports, since you and I last talked, the Canadian Chamber has had its annual general meeting, and at that we bring together chambers from across the country and vote on resolutions that form the policy base for our advocacy. And what was interesting this year was there was a resolution on proposing to the federal government that studies be done, that trial done on a guaranteed annual income. Not endorsing the program, but saying, let's do a trial and see how it works and see if this is something that could be helpful to us in terms of reform of our support programs. Now, it's ironic because it took my mind back to when I first ran for office back in 1972. And under Bob Stanfield, our party's platform included a guaranteed annual income. So it seems that ideas, everything old is new again if you wait long enough. And it's an idea which the Chamber indicated that it was in favor of examining and looking at to see if it was workable. We've got a note saying that we are running out of time pretty quickly, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you about was I see a potential for the two of us to be working together with government on the issue of the future of work. we've learned a lot as a result of COVID-19 and how we've been forced to adapt. I've talked to many CEOs of companies. I have yet to find one who said our company is going to look the way it did before COVID. We're not, all of them have said we're not going back to the way it was. We've learned as a result of the new technologies. We're going to be using working from home, remote working much more than we did before, using digital technologies more, reinventing how we deal with our employees, how we deal with customers and suppliers and so on. And there's a potential here for persons with disabilities that the flexibility on the part of employers now, at least in sectors where it's possible to do it, the flexibility to allow people to work from home may create opportunities that persons with disabilities didn't have before. This is an opportunity for us, as I see it, but we need to get a better sense, in my view, Hassan, as to what sort of permanent changes are taking place in the nature of work. Where do those pose threats to us in terms of the ability of business to function or workers, and where are there opportunities here that we can build upon?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. Except for me and a couple of my assistants and others who have been in the office, nobody's been in the office since March. And yet we're functioning in many ways, carrying out the work that we're responsible for. And we had to improvise, and we've improvised quite interestingly as to how we're doing all of this and scratching our head at the same time. Because any given week before COVID, I would be 4 or 5 flights a week, crisscrossing the country, visiting members, speaking at different events, and all of that has been done by Zoom and other platforms over the last number of months. And I'm asking myself, what part of this would change when this pandemic comes to an end, but equally, what part of it might remain when the pandemic is over, and we are yet to understand any of this, I think, to a large extent. But I do believe that what COVID has shown, there's many different ways we can do work without following the traditional approach we've always done. And I think what that does, it opens the possibility, especially for people with disability, if there is an openness to making that leap to say you're going to hire somebody, there's ways of doing that in a way that would be much easier than we've thought before. Many of us thought we couldn't go a week without not taking a flight. We had to be at every meeting in person, otherwise the world would come to an end. Well, the world hasn't come to an end. And even the world leaders in major countries are functioning by doing so virtually. So I think it changes a lot. I'm hoping at the same time, though, what it will also do is give some recognition about other things that we haven't thought about. And that's, of course, the point you've made about how we can look at the employment of people with disabilities through a different lens, and figure out how we can accelerate the opportunities for people to get an opportunity to get a job, and more importantly, how that can be accommodated without having going through all the myriad of things we used to do in the past. Of course, on a personal level, I like to see people. I think there's something about it that is unique. I like to look at a person and talk with them indirectly, but the reality is, that doesn't mean you can't still do that, but just means you can also do other things at the same time. And I think the COVID has certainly, I think, give us many things to think about. And I think as the government will move to bring us together under the legislation, I'm hoping again that our way of how we've approached working together can lead to some success, but equally lead to some fundamental change that will give people an opportunity to get employment and to improve their employment and work.
Thank you.
So I'll see Alec back on our screen here.
We'll give Perrin a 15-second last word, and then we'll be wrapping up.
Just simply thank you, Alec, very much for getting us together. Hassan, it's a pleasure to get together again. There are all sorts of areas where management and labor can disagree, but on the vast majority of issues have the same goal. And that's to create opportunity, to create economic prosperity, and to ensure that all Canadians are able to benefit as a result.